The river lay restless beneath the dusk, its skin of silver rippling under the first breath of evening wind. The tall cottonwoods leaned close to listen, their branches trembling with the song of rushing water. Out on the riverbank, where grass bent low and earth smelled of rain and clay, a woman knelt with her daughter. Her hands were thin, worn by hunger and wandering, yet her back was straight, her spirit refusing to bow. She was 36, though sorrow had carved lines that made her seem older. Her dark hair, once braided with pride, now spilled loose, tangled by travel and neglect. The child beside her was 6, small enough to be gathered in one arm, yet carrying eyes far too wise for so few years. They had been walking for days with no roof but the sky, no bed but the earth. The girl tugged at her mother's hand, asking with a trembling voice if they would find shelter tonight. The mother answered gently, though her throat ached from thirst. Somewhere beyond these trees, perhaps, someone would offer kindness. Yet she knew well the cruelty of townsfolk, how they turned from her face, her dress, her silence. She had been called poor, a beggar, a shadow best forgotten. But she endured, for the child deserved better than abandonment. The river whispered, as if to test her will. Foam licked the banks, and the girl leaned forward, curious. A petal, bright and red, floated past, perhaps from a flower carried down from faraway hills. The child's eyes widened. She broke from her mother's grasp, chasing it to the water's edge. Her small fingers reached, and in a blink, her feet slipped on the slick mud. The river swallowed her cry. The woman's scream tore the quiet wide open. She lunged, but the current was quick, dragging the girl into its throat. She splashed in up to her knees, her dress heavy with water, her arms thrashing to reach her daughter's hair that flashed dark beneath the foam. Fear stabbed her chest, for she could not swim beyond the shallow bend. Her voice cracked into the wilderness, desperate, calling for anyone, for mercy, for a savior unseen. Far off, hooves drummed against the earth. A rider was cutting across the land, his horse swift beneath him. He had been on his way home, the weight of another day of ranching on his shoulders, when the cry reached his ears. Sharp and raw, it pulled him like a rope tied to the heart. Without thought he turned toward the sound, urging his stallion through grass and shadow until the river opened before him. He was 34, tall in the saddle, his frame built from years of labor under sun and dust. Wealth had not softened him, though land and cattle bore his name. His jaw was set, his eyes steady as steel, yet inside him lived a quiet emptiness that riches could not fill. He saw the woman, her arms outstretched, her body trembling with despair, and he saw the child's small head rising and vanishing in the current. He leapt from his horse before the animal had fully halted. Boots struck the ground, then the water, without hesitation. The cold bit into him as he dove, his body slicing through waves like a blade. The current pulled, fought, tried to bury him in its grip, but he surged deeper, reaching for the faint glimmer of a hand. His fingers closed around the girl's wrist. Her body was limp, her breath stolen, but life still clung. With a force that tore through his muscles, he dragged her upward, kicking against the weight of the river. They broke the surface, air crashing into lungs, water spilling from mouth and nose. He held her high, fighting the sweep of the current, until his boots found the riverbed once more. Step by agonizing step, he carried her to shore. The woman rushed forward, falling beside them. She gathered her daughter into her arms, pressing her lips to the girl's wet hair, whispering prayers and thanks in a voice broken by relief. The child coughed, sputtered, then drew in a shallow breath. The sound was small, fragile, but it was life returning. Tears spilled freely down the mother's face, mingling with river water and sweat. The cowboy, soaked and panting, sat back on his heels. His chest rose and fell like a bellows, each breath drawn from the very edge of exhaustion. Yet his gaze never left the girl. When her eyes fluttered open, when her lips quivered around the taste of air, something inside him softened, something long locked away. He touched her shoulder lightly, then withdrew, as if fearing to intrude on their bond. The woman lifted her gaze to him. Her eyes, dark as the river's depth, met his. In them burned gratitude, but also uncertainty. Who was this man who had leapt without pause into danger for a stranger's child? She wanted to speak, to offer words of thanks, but they tangled in her throat. Instead, she pressed the child closer, as though shielding her from the world, even from the very man who had saved her. He stood slowly, water dripping from his hat brim and sleeves. For a moment, silence stretched between them, filled only by the river's fading roar and the ragged breaths of the child. He looked at the woman again, noting the hollowness in her cheeks, the threadbare dress clinging to her skin, the weariness that weighed her shoulders. Yet behind it all was strength, the kind carved not by ease, but by survival. He wanted to offer something, a word, a gesture, a promise. Yet he knew how often pride resisted pity. So he only nodded, as if to say the rescue had needed no thanks. He turned slightly, scanning the horizon, then back to her, waiting. The woman's heart pounded with more than fear. She owed this stranger her child's life, but she had nothing to give. No home, no coin, no name that carried weight. Her lips parted, a whisper rising, yet before it could form, the girl coughed again, a stronger sound this time, and her small hand clutched at her mother's sleeve. The cowboy's eyes flickered, something unreadable stirring in them, before he stepped closer. His shadow stretched across them both as he spoke, his voice low, carrying a weight that pressed into the evening air. "You cannot stay by this river tonight." The woman blinked, torn between fear and the faintest flicker of hope. She tightened her arms around her daughter, the water still dripping from her dress, and waited for what would follow. The fire crackled in the hollow of night, each ember rising like a prayer into the black sky. The man had built it quickly, his hands practiced, his movements steady. Sparks danced upward, finding their way into the folds of darkness where stars already shimmered. The mother sat close, her daughter pressed against her chest, both cloaked in the warmth of the flames. The girl shivered, her wet dress clinging, but the heat slowly drove the chill away. The man moved with quiet efficiency, laying out a blanket, setting a tin cup of water within reach. He did not hover, yet his presence filled the space like a shield. The woman's eyes flickered toward him, uncertain. He had saved her child from the river, and now he saved them from the cold. Still, her pride held her back from easy words. Gratitude trembled inside her, tangled with suspicion. The world had never given without demanding something in return. She wondered what a man of wealth and stature, strong in the shoulders and firm in the jaw, would expect from a poor, wandering mother and her girl. Her fingers brushed her daughter's hair as if to promise that no debt would bind them. Not again. He crouched by the fire, placing beans in a small pan, the scent rising and curling through the air. The horse, tethered nearby, snorted softly, stamping the ground as if impatient with the stillness. The man glanced across the flames, his eyes catching the light. Steel softened into silver. When he spoke, his voice was low, careful, like one unused to filling silence with unnecessary words. He told them to eat, gesturing gently, as though it mattered little to him if they accepted or not. The girl's hunger betrayed her restraint. She leaned forward, her small hands twitching toward the food. The mother hesitated, but when the child looked up with pleading eyes, she nodded and allowed her to take a portion. The girl's face brightened, the first real light in it since the river, and she ate quickly, laughter breaking free when a bean slipped and burned her lip. The sound startled them all, a fragile music neither mother nor cowboy expected. The woman felt tears prick, hidden in the shadows of her lashes. She had not heard her daughter laugh in many weeks. She lifted her gaze to the cowboy, finding him already watching, not with pity, but with something else, something steadier, like recognition. She turned away quickly, the fire warming her cheeks more than the flames themselves. Time stretched with the rhythm of crickets and the faint rustle of leaves overhead. The man spoke little, but when he did, he asked about their journey. His tone carried no interrogation, only quiet respect. The woman gave fragments, never the full weight. She spoke of leaving places where doors closed before her, where her child was met with harsh eyes and sharper tongues. She spoke of walking until her feet blistered, of nights beneath trees and mornings with nothing but water for breakfast. He did not press for more. He only listened, the firelight flickering across his still face, as though every word was a stone he would carry for her. She asked nothing of him, but he offered pieces all the same. He had grown up on land passed down, land where cattle grazed and men respected him for his strength. Yet beneath his words lay an emptiness she sensed but could not name. He spoke of a sister once lost to water, a younger soul he could not reach in time. His jaw tightened when he said it, his eyes darkening like the river at night. She realized then why he had leapt so quickly into danger. Saving her daughter was not only mercy, it was redemption. The girl, now warm and full, curled into the blanket and slipped into sleep. Her breath was steady, her hand curled around her mother's sleeve. The woman watched her chest rise and fall, the rhythm of a miracle, before turning back to the man. She whispered her thanks at last, though the word felt too small. He only shook his head gently, as if the river had demanded his courage, and he had merely obeyed. Footsteps interrupted the fragile stillness. From the dark edge of a clearing, another figure emerged, a ranch hand carrying a lantern. He called out to the cowboy by name, his voice carrying a note of disapproval, when his eyes fell upon the woman and child. He asked why his friend wasted kindness on strays, why a man of standing would sully himself with wanderers who brought nothing but burden. The words sliced the air, cruel in their casualness. The woman stiffened, her shoulders rising, her eyes fixed on the ground. Shame pressed heavy, the old, familiar sting of rejection. She wanted to rise, to leave, though the night was cold and her child still fragile. Before she could, the cowboy spoke. His voice was quiet but unshakable. He said they were under his protection, and no man would question it further. The ranch hand muttered, uncomfortable, before retreating into the darkness, his lantern fading until only the fire remained. The silence that followed was different now, heavier, threaded with unspoken things. The woman dared to look at the cowboy again. He had not defended her with passion or anger, but with a steadiness that felt stronger than either. She saw no pity in his gaze, no calculation, only respect. For the first time in years, she felt not judged, but seen. The child stirred, waking briefly. She looked at the cowboy shyly, then plucked a small flower she had picked earlier, now wilting in her hand. She held it out to him. He accepted it, holding it gently as though it were treasure, and smiled faintly. Then he showed her how to place a blade of grass between her thumbs and blow, producing a strange, shrill whistle that sent her into fits of laughter. Her giggles rose like bells into the night, carrying away the heaviness for a moment. The mother's eyes glistened as she watched. That sound, that simple joy, was worth more than any gold. She whispered a prayer that this night would not fade too quickly, that her daughter might carry laughter again tomorrow. She glanced at the cowboy, noticing the faint smile still lingering, and wondered if fate had placed him here not by chance, but by design. The fire sank lower, shadows stretching long. The cowboy rose, laying another log across the embers. His silhouette glowed against the flames, a figure both distant and near. He looked across at the mother once more, his voice softer than the night wind. He told her she would not face the road alone, not while he drew breath. Her heart jolted at the weight of those words, their promise too vast to grasp. She wanted to answer, but the words caught, tangled in fear and longing. Before she could find them, thunder rolled faintly from the horizon, a low warning carried on the wind. The girl stirred again, clutching tighter to her mother's sleeve, as if the river had not yet finished testing them. The storm came without warning, breaking open the sky, as if some unseen hand had split it apart. Rain fell in torrents, drumming against the earth, hammering leaves into submission. The river, already restless, swelled with sudden fury, its waters turning black beneath the crack of lightning. The cowboy led them along the bank, urging speed, his horse pulling against the reins as thunder rolled overhead. The mother clutched her daughter's hand, her dress heavy with water, her hair plastered to her face. Fear returned like a memory she had tried to bury, for the river seemed once again hungry for what it had nearly taken. The girl stumbled, her small legs struggling in the mud. She tried to keep pace, but a root caught her foot and she slipped, tumbling forward. The mother cried out, reaching for her, but the child rolled down the bank, her body sliding toward the boiling current. In the blink of an eye, the water had her again, dragging her under with cruel force. The scream that tore from the mother's chest was raw, splitting the storm's roar, a sound of despair so deep it silenced even the thunder for a moment in his ears. The cowboy's body moved before thought could form. He thrust the reins into the woman's hands, leapt down the embankment, and plunged into the torrent. The cold struck him like 1,000 knives, the current battering him sideways, pulling at his limbs with relentless strength. He kicked hard, his breath tearing from his lungs, his eyes scanning the foam for any trace of the girl. Lightning split the sky, illuminating a small arm, fingers flailing before they vanished beneath the water. He dove, lungs burning, reaching into the void. Memories surged with the current. His sister's face, her laughter, her sudden silence beneath the river years ago. He had been too slow then, too weak, and the weight of failure had never left him. Not this time. He swore it into the storm, into the heart of the river itself. He would not lose this child. His hands found fabric, a sleeve, and he pulled with every ounce of strength left in his body. Together they burst through the surface, the girl coughing water, gasping for air. The current clawed at them both, but he fought, teeth clenched, arms burning, dragging her against his chest. The river tried to spin them, tried to slam them against rocks, but he pushed on, his eyes fixed on the bank where the woman knelt, reaching out with desperate hands. Step by brutal step, he forced his body forward until his feet touched earth, until he could lift the girl into her mother's embrace. He collapsed beside them, the storm raging overhead, his chest heaving, his hands shaking. The child coughed violently, water spilling from her lips, but breath returned. The sound was fragile yet triumphant. The mother sobbed, pressing her forehead against her daughter's, whispering words of love and gratitude in a tongue older than the land itself. She lifted her eyes to the cowboy, her tears mingling with the rain on her face. In that gaze was not just thanks, but something deeper, recognition of the bond forged between them, carved from the fire of danger and the mercy of survival. He tried to rise but staggered, his body cut and bruised from rocks. The woman steadied him, her hand firm on his arm, her strength surprising even herself. The three of them huddled beneath the storm, the child wrapped between them, as though the world beyond the river no longer existed. Yet danger had not fully passed. The ranch hand emerged once more, drawn by the noise, his lantern struggling against the rain. He shouted above the storm, demanding they move, insisting the woman and child would bring ruin. His words dripped with the venom of prejudice, a man unwilling to see beyond the surface. The cowboy turned, his eyes blazing with something the ranch hand had never seen in him before. He declared with steady voice that the woman and her daughter were under his care, not as charity, but as choice, as truth. The hand faltered, caught between loyalty and discomfort, before retreating, muttering curses swallowed by thunder. His departure left the night to them, the storm's fury softening as if shamed into silence. The rain slowed, the clouds parting just enough for the moon to slip through, silver light glistening on the drenched earth. The mother and child sat close, their breaths steadying, their eyes turned to the cowboy as he finally found his footing again. He looked down at them both, something unspoken heavy in his chest. He had carried land and cattle, gold and respect, yet none of it had ever mattered as much as the fragile lives he now protected. The woman, trembling with exhaustion, lifted her hand to his. She did not speak at first, but her touch said what words could not: trust, gratitude, and the first fragile thread of something more. When she finally found her voice, it broke softly, telling him he had given them not only life, but a chance to belong. He shook his head, his voice quiet but firm, saying it was she who had given him purpose again, she who had filled the emptiness he had carried for years. The child stirred, her small fingers reaching for the cowboy's sleeve. He smiled faintly, brushing damp hair from her forehead, his heart tight with a tenderness he had not known he still carried. For the first time since his sister's death, he felt the weight of failure lift, replaced by the certainty that he had redeemed what was once lost. They moved together toward his horse, the storm fading into memory. The horizon glowed faintly with the promise of dawn, colors stretching across the sky like a painter's brush. The mother glanced back at the river, its surface calmer now, deceptive in its serenity. She tightened her hold on her daughter, vowing never to let the water steal her again. When they reached the horse, the cowboy paused. He looked at the woman, his eyes steady, and told her she had a home now, not as guest, not as burden, but as equal beside him. The words lingered in the air, heavy with promise, carrying the weight of a vow deeper than any spoken before. The mother's breath caught. For years she had walked nameless roads, unseen, unwanted, yet here stood a man who did not see ruin in her, but resilience. She felt the shift inside her, the fragile beginning of hope taking root. The girl leaned against her, smiling faintly, whispering that she was not afraid anymore. The cowboy looked out across the land, the dawn light catching the edge of his profile. His voice, low and certain, carried into the silence. Sometimes rivers come not to drown us, but to reveal who will die for us. He turned back to them, his hand extended, steady and sure. The woman hesitated only a breath, then placed her hand in his, her daughter's fingers curling around them both. In that moment, under the soft light of dawn, they stood not as strangers bound by chance, but as souls bound by something stronger. And yet, as the sun broke fully across the land, a hawk circled overhead, its cry sharp, reminding them that peace was never permanent in this country. The river behind them whispered still, as if promising it might yet test them again.